Nice setting for today's video. Hills above Kapiti Island. It's the afternoon of Wednesday, the 12th of June 2024. So I had this dream around 3 weeks ago. So late May 2024. Bear with me because I took some notes for this one. So I'll briefly outline the structure of the video. So I'm giving the introduction now. Then I'll just get straight into the dream. Then I will give the interpretation and then the discussion. So 1, 2, 3. In reality, the discussion and interpretation tend to be rolled together. And then I'll wrap up and then I'll do the conclusion. So I'll get straight into it. Start now. I'll just give you the dream. So this was what I believe, important specific thing to point out, was a prophetic dream from God that I received via the Holy Spirit. Now, I believe this is prophetic. Yeah, I'll remind you again at the end, but if you haven't already done so, please refer to the disclaimer in the description box below. In the dream, it was the 2060s, so it was about 40 years in the future, give or take, more or less. I just knew this in the dream, it was given to me. So let's say I was in the year 2064. It was around then. I wasn't given an exact date, but I was given 2060s in the dream. So yeah, let's say 40 years from now, 2064. Well, imagine yourself in the lounge of a comfortable house. So in the dream, I was in the 2060s, and this was long after World War III had concluded. So World War III was history. And that's important to point out because look down and you see my knees, worn jeans here, and I laid out a book, and the book was a history book. And it was very large. So the pages were from top to bottom of each page was... Okay, so I just had to pause and measure that with my ruler. I'm doing this from in a position where I don't have a huge amount of money, that's putting it politely. And yeah, I'm doing it on a budget, so I'm doing the best I can. So you'll have to bear with me, it's a little bit rough, but it's better to get the warnings and the prophetic dreams out as early as possible, even if the format's not perfect, than not to get them out at all. So, ideally I'd have a tripod and a printed out script that I'd read off. Seagull going past here. It's an immature Larus dominicanus, or Kelp Gull. We call them Black Blacked Gulls in New Zealand. Put a link in the description box to the species if you want to go check out what that was. Large species of gull. Yeah, ideally this would be better organized to have a proper camera and a tripod and a script and everything. I'm just not in a position yet where I can be that organized, but yeah, patience, time will come. You got some nice scenery though. So yeah, it's I think I'm doing pretty well under the circumstances. So yeah, the pages of the book were about 50 centimeters high from top to bottom. So for any American viewers, that's almost 2 feet high. And they were about 40 centimeters, which is about 1.3 inches wide. So it was a large, kind of almost coffee table type book. It was a book that was kind of similar in format and size, very large, big pages for images. So many atlases. It looked like an atlas in terms of the kind of book it was. Except it was actually a history book, but it was it was a history book in the future of the past. So I'm filming this video in 2024. So in the dream, I was in 2064, and this was a history book of the past. But obviously that past at that time is still in the future today in 2024. So it was a history book of World War III. But it was very graphical, and it had a lot of maps and illustrations. It was a history book of World War III that was basically chronicling the entire war, kind of week by week, almost day by day. So it had just pages and pages of these maps, and it was, I would say so, month, whatever, or yeah, day, whatever. And so I flipped the pages of the book open, and I laid it in my lap, and then I came to a page and I saw a map of Ukraine, and it's the map of Ukraine that I saw was framed such that you could see the image of the landmass of the south of the country directly above the Crimean Peninsula, and it corresponds more or less exactly to the thumbnail image that I have given this video. So I found a satellite image for Ukraine, and then I cropped it, and that's pretty much the land area I saw that was depicted on the map. And what I saw was a kind of vertical line that bisected the country in two, from west to east. And on the west it was green, the map was colored in green, and on the east side it was colored in red. The red represented the Axis forces and the green represented the Allied forces. And it was given to me that this was a huge war. The war had massively escalated, and it was just, it was total war. It was war on the scale, magnitude, and kind of level of the Eastern Front in World War II. For any of you guys who know much about that period in history, you'll know that those were the biggest battles fought in recorded history. The Battle of Stalingrad, I think 1.5 million people died. It's literally the biggest, deadliest battle in recorded history. Millions died on the Eastern Front. Most of Germany's war in World War II was the Eastern Front. It's a common misconception that the US kind of saved Europe from the Nazis. In reality, the vast majority of the fighting and deaths was done by the Russians under the Soviet Union, and they incurred the vast majority of the casualties. Not to say the Americans didn't play a role, they did, but to say, the Americans saved Europe, it's like, well, how do I put this? If that was actually true, I think about 400,000 American men lost their lives fighting World War II. If the US had taken Russia's place and taking the full brunt and force of the German war machine, millions and millions of Americans would have died, and not just troops, but civilians. So the US had a role, but but Vladimir Putin's talked about that in the past. It's just not, it's kind of propaganda to say that, the US swooped in and saved the day. Yeah, they played a role, but if anything, Russia kind of did it just defending itself. It was a mistake for Germany in World War II to have invaded Russia. Had a Kiwi friend who is now he was kind of an asshole to me and a domineering alpha male, because he's emotionally stunted and insecure, like a lot of Kiwi men. Felt the need to kind of bully me and put me down because he was insecure. We were friends from when we were kindergarten, and I had a spiritual awakening in 2010, and I just snapped at him one day when I realized what he'd been doing, and it all came out in a blast. It was a little bit brutal with him in the way I said it. I realized that I'd been brutal with it, and I took that back and apologized. But I was right, actually. He is kind of emotionally stunted and was being just horrible to me. I said I don't deserve that, and typical bully, just absolutely savage and brutal to me, and say the most horrible, nasty things. Guy is a recreational alcoholic, like a lot of young Kiwi men, which doesn't help. That shuts down your heart, so you can't feel other people's pain because you can't feel your own. That's what allows them to be brutal. Years of making brutal, saying horrible things, just crushing my self-esteem. I bite back once, just as hard. It was like I committed a war crime, and I'm so disappointed, and the friendship ended. Jeez, anyway, whatever. A lot of Kiwi guys are like that. Hearts are shut down with most of the population here. Most of them, Kiwis are nice on the surface, but I find a lot of, if not the majority, a large portion of them, it's only superficial. If you dig deeper, there's not much there, and you're either the beater or the beaten. That's why they're also quite passive aggressive, because hearts are shut down. But anyway, this guy well, he's a Kiwi. He grew up here. If he was European, he'd have more emotional intelligence and be more mature. But his parents are German. I mean, he speaks German, but he was raised here. But you can tell he's a Kiwi male because he's emotionally retarded. And just to point out, I mean, I would say most Kiwis, God told me that in a dream, most Kiwis are emotionally retarded. I don't say that to be mean, I'm just being honest. It's just the truth, and say it to bring awareness. It's only with awareness can we then change it. The women aren't much better. It's the entire population, and most adults are kind of emotionally stunted here, and it needs to change so the country can grow up, evolve, and heal and mature. And I've talked about Europeans are much better, partly ironically because of what I'm talking about. I mean, the collective horrors and trauma of World Wars I and II gave them PTSD, gave Germany and France and entire countries in Europe, many of them, collective PTSD because it was so traumatic, but then they underwent post-traumatic growth, so they grew and became more mature and enlightened in the aftermath. So I find Germans are actually very emotionally mature and humble as a people, partly because of this collectively. And most other people in European countries, compared to Anglo-Saxons, who are often very, very arrogant and immature because they haven't had their asses kicked collectively in their history. So they're arrogant and overconfident because they haven't experienced ground invasions in a world war, which is absolutely brutal and savage. And that's partly why our countries will experience that in World War III, because we're collectively we're like little children running around with all these advanced weapons, and we're slaughtering all these people in developing countries, and we're going to get our karma. Anyway, I know it's a little bit of a tangent, but it is related. I just, whatever, I am who I am. I make no apologies for it. If you don't like it, you're welcome to unsubscribe. It's people of my personality type, we will sometimes on these monologues, we will kind of loop around, but it will always loop around back to the main point. So and this is method in the madness. So his dad, though, this father of this German guy I knew, such a dick, man. I've lost, when I had his spiritual awakening, I literally lost every single Kiwi friend and every single Kiwi family member, because they kind of work in packs, my ones. But, there are cool Kiwis, there are good Kiwis. It's not all of them. It's just my friend group and my family were particularly toxic. There's a lot of good people, good New Zealanders here. It's not all of them. But, And, but I'd interviewed his dad. I had another Kiwi friend who I'd known since kindergarten, and he's an officer in the New Zealand Army too. Just total arrogant dick. I was in an absolute crisis and suicidal, and he talked about how I was, quote, traveling a holiday around Europe and basically mocking. I was like, dude, Ecuador's in South America, and how the frick could you say that to someone who's supposed to be your close friend? He literally mocked me for opening up about my emotions when I was suicidal in the past. These people are just next level, really. And they get angry at you if you need a place to stay when you're suicidal and homeless because you're inconveniencing them. That's because they're programmed to be selfish. And the second guy I'm talking about, who's an officer in the New Zealand Army, he's a freaking Christian. I mean, this place, the society is, man, there's an argument to be made that Chinese bayonets and Russian nuclear weapons will do this place a lot of good. So you couldn't pay me to fight to defend the society. I think they need it on some level. You wouldn't say they deserve it. Hopefully the good ones out there will get the warning and get the frick out of here. It's Babylon, bro. Anyway, so the German guy, Kiwi guy, because he's emotionally stunted. I'm part European, part Kiwi, I can say that. If he was, fully German or Spanish, he'd be emotionally mature and have empathy. But most Germans and Spanish guys who are white from an upper middle class background are kind and mature and have emotional intelligence. Most white Kiwi upper middle class guys are emotionally retarded. I can say that because I'm both. But his dad he's quite old. His dad is, it must be 92 now. I think his dad had him when he was in his late 50s. he was alive at the end of World War II. I actually interviewed him for a high school project when I was at high school about World War II. I interviewed him about his experiences at the end of World War II. I think he was 7 or 8 years old in 1945, and he told me about, he told me stories about, being on trains when they got machine gunned, people were dying, all around him, like stories is that, because he was in Prussia and they were retreating west to get away from the Russians as the Russians roared through Germany. For those of you who don't know, when the Russians invaded East Prussia and Germany at the end of World War II in late 44, 1945, it's the biggest, fastest mass migration, I think, in history. There was something like 9 million Germans just dropped everything and fled west because the Russians were so freaking brutal, taking revenge on the civilian population because it is true, they were absolutely brutal. I met a woman in Vilcabamba when I was in South America, a German woman in her 80s, and she had aunts and great aunts who got caught in the East, and she said everyone got raped between the ages of 8 to 85. She had a great aunt who got gang raped to death. They'd be brutally tortured, like it was beyond savage. Yeah. I'll put an article to an account of what happened at this village called Nemmersdorf, and oh my gosh, it's like something out of a horror movie. The Russians, they burst through the German front lines for the first time. It took a while before the Wehrmacht, the German army, could kind of regroup and re-establish their lines and kick the Soviets, the Russian soldiers, out of the salient. This is the first time the Russians had reached Germany and kind of managed to get in through the ranks of the army into a civilian area, and it was just like hot demonic lava pouring through. They gang raped all these women. They cut people in half. They crucified people. They were like babies. They ran people over with tanks. It was just like an absolute horror movie. There were these French prisoners of war who just instinctively went to help the woman, and they're castrated them and shoved their genitals in their mouth and tortured them to death. I mean, just stuff. This is like Saw, but the worst horror movie you can think of, but in real life. Some of the German public didn't actually believe it when they first heard it because they thought the propaganda was that extreme, but they later realized no, it was that bad. So the Russians were beyond brutal to the Germans as they came through, and that's true. But what you won't hear often. So yeah, ex-Kiwi friend of these two German parents, who's a lawyer and an officer in the New Zealand Army today, who's just a frickin' typical ignorant, arrogant, emotionally stunted dick who needs to get who to be fair probably really deserves to be shot by the Chinese and the Russians in this war, but deep down I still love him. I don't know why. Treated me like crap anyway. What can I say? I'm a kind soul. Yeah, I mean, you'll hear Germans talk. I mean, this friend had talked about in the past, I remember when we were teenagers and my close friends, there were so many rapes, what the Russians did to the Germans. Yeah, but they won't talk about the fact that the Russians were consciously pumped up by officers to hate the Germans and to want to kill them and to want to commit atrocities. It was a war of hate. But it was karmic. It was just the pendulum swinging the other way for what the Germans did to the Russians. And, Slavs were considered Untermensch, subhuman. I mean, they genocided far more Slavic people, and Russians were genocided by Nazis than Jews. And they killed, I think it was around 10 million at least, Russian and civilians in the USSR were murdered by Germans. And they would have raped plenty too. But so it's not like taking revenge in a brutal way is not the way to deal with it. Justice and revenge are two different things. That's a topic for a separate video. But it's not like it didn't come from nowhere. But this friend, whose dad I interviewed, who's now in his 90s, I interviewed him back in about 2004. His dad was, he wasn't in the German army. He trained pilots for the Luftwaffe, so we had some stories about that. But yeah, he said how he remembers, let's call him Roger. It's not 92-year-old German man, it's real name. Let's call him Roger. Roger's father came home, the one who trained pilots for the Luftwaffe, the day the Germans, Nazi Germany, launched Operation Barbarossa, where they invaded Russia, and he said, we've lost the war. Because he had the insight that, just declaring a war on a country that big was just not a good idea, and it meant that Germany ended up fighting a war on two fronts, and it took years for it to get going. But when the full might of the Soviet war machine got going, to be fair, they had a lot of help from the Americans, but they did do it themselves ultimately. I mean, they were just outnumbered, and like, it was just, I mean, they lost the war mostly because of Russia. And if you look at it, this is important context for what I'm talking about, because in the dream I was shown, it was given to me that this was kind of deja vu. This was like World War II all over again. It was this huge front line, and it was given to me that there were enormous battles happening all along this front line. It was just this vast clash of civilizations, and it wasn't shown to me in the dream, but I presume it wasn't just Russia. There were other countries there supporting Russia, and there were many Western countries on the other side. And then, you could see this line, vertical line, so west and east. And what I realized after, when I woke up and looked at a map, it corresponded to the line of the river Dnieper. So this was in the future. What I was being shown is that the Russians had taken basically the eastern half of Ukraine up to the Dnieper. So they'd conquered a lot more land than they currently have now, and they'd really pushed the Ukrainians back. They might have even taken Kiev at this point. And you could see the line, and it bulged outwards from above Crimea, and then it went up like that. And when I woke up and I checked on the map, I realized, the Holy Spirit, God was showing me via the Holy Spirit that they'd reached the river Dnieper. And it was just this map. And then it zoomed in the dream. The Holy Spirit zoomed in my view on the bottom part of the map, and I saw a little circle with a flag on it. It was the Estonian flag. And then I was quietly told by the Holy Spirit, the Estonian troops are on the ground fighting in this sector. And then I saw a little circle just below it, and it had the Dutch flag, but the outline of the circle was hatched, so it wasn't a straight line. It had breaks in it, the line around the circle. And then I was told, and the Dutch troops are just about to arrive. They're just getting ready, and they were just about to be flown in with aircraft, and as well as on the ground. They were just getting. I was told, it would be a couple of days. The first Dutch troops would be on the ground fighting the Russians, and that was pretty much it. But it's significant for a number of reasons. There's quite a bit to unpack here. I'll get through it reasonably quickly, because we just feel to wrap this up now. But so it was a short, brief dream, and I wasn't shown much, but as is the case often when I have these dreams, there's a lot to unpack, given the ratio between what I was shown and the time that I was shown it in. So it might have been 10 or 15 seconds, but then there's so much information that comes out of it. So there's a very high ratio of information that comes out of, it might be say a 15-second dream, but then I could talk about it for 15 minutes. It probably won't be 15 minutes, but it's often the way it goes. I get it's like a kind of very nutrient dense food. You just eat a little bit, you get a lot out of it. So I made some notes. I'll just refer to those now. Give me a sec. Okay, in terms of symbolism, so one of the reasons that the land, which the Axis side in World War III, the Russians and their allies had captured, one of the reasons it was coloured in red was it was symbolising communism. So that's one note I made. I've had a number of dreams from God where it's been emphasised to me that there's an element behind the scenes of communism that's being coordinated globally, especially between Russia and China. Had quite a strong dream about that I haven't published yet, but so there's been quite a few about communism. So that's partly what that represented. That was partly why the Axis side was given that colour, red, for the flag of the USSR and the flag of China are mostly red. Many other people on YouTube who have had prophetic dreams of World War III, Christians, have had dreams about this, how it's actually like the USSR never really went away, it just pretended to have disappeared, but it was kind of a trick, and it's coming back, and this will be communist Russia. Yeah, and the second point is, I just alluded to this before, but there was the dual symbolism, the deja vu type symbolism where it was made very clear and apparent to me that this war and this battle on the Eastern Front was very much like a deja vu. We've been here before. It was a repeat of World War II. Same thing, kind of, more or less, same part of the world, just some different countries on each side, different groups involved, different time in history, but kind of just a repeat, a cycle. And I'll put a link in the description box below to another dream I had that was about American, Australian and New Zealand troops fighting in the Pacific Ocean in the latter stages, the final third of World War III, island hopping and taking back island chains, atolls and just islands in the Pacific Ocean from China. And it was given to me then again, it was this theme of the repetition, the deja vu, like we've been here before, it's the same thing again. Put a link in the description box below to another video of a prophetic dream I had. It's actually a preview for the full prophetic dream of part of World War III that I was given from the Holy Spirit about what will happen in Belgium. I haven't had a chance to do the full one yet. But again, there was that theme. I was showing Belgian, Australian and New Zealand troops fighting in Belgium against the Germans, but also against the Russians. That's a repeat of World War I. The battles like the Passchendaele or the Somme, Ypres. It's written like Yip. It's written as if you would say it Ypres. YRPES or something like that. The pronunciation's different. I'll correct that stuff in the description box below. I apologize if I'm making mistakes with regards to pronunciation and spelling of French words. But yeah, very much the deja vu theme. World War III will see many repeats and kind of karmic loops of very similar themes of World War I and World War II. In a sense, with something else we can reflect upon there. This is not so much interpretation as discussion, is that, lessons are repeated until they're learned, which is a good lesson for life and in itself, a meta lesson if you like. Humanity isn't getting the lessons, so we're not learning the lessons, so we have to keep repeating them even when they're painful. And that dynamic operates both individually and collectively. A good thing to ask yourself when bad stuff happens to you, to flip the script and shift the narrative when life gets hard and bad things happen to you, is instead of asking yourself, why did this happen? Ask yourself, what is this trying to teach me? And that will help you to evolve and get the lesson, because there's always a lesson. Everything happens for a reason. Yeah, the third point I mentioned, the front lines roughly corresponded to the line of the Dnieper. Covered that. I discovered that when I woke up. That was kind of a confirmation, because in the dream I didn't really understand why the front line was where it was and why it looked that way, but then I woke up and I didn't realize it, but it's more or less exactly the line of the Dnieper as it flows up through Ukraine. Yeah, to be clear, I was just showing what the area the Russians and the Allies were in that part of Ukraine. I don't know if they'd taken Kiev in the north. I was only showing what had happened in that area. Okay, the fourth point is something I kind of inferred indirectly when I reflected upon the dream in the following days. This is kind of, the symbolism wasn't direct, it was inferred. You had to sort of think about it and then work it out. But okay, so if this represented NATO full on, boom, just, hang on, just Russia, and then I can't do it with my other hand. I'm restricted at the moment. But okay, imagine another fist. It's upside down. NATO, appropriately upside down because it's not going to be strong like this. Russia, bang, really, really strong. NATO, not so strong and kind of a bit disorganized, but clashing in Ukraine. And yeah, I was only showing Estonia and the Netherlands, but obviously, if you think about it, this is where I had to think about it. Those are two quite small countries in Europe. I think Estonia only has something like 3.5 million people. Geographically, it's, by global standards, tiny. And the Netherlands isn't very big either, really. I think it's, I don't think it's half the size of the South Island, but they've got something like 16 or 17 million people. So the population's not tiny, but the land area is relatively small. I mean, I think it's about, oh, hang on. I think it's less than 20% the land area of New Zealand, but they have at least 3 times the population. I'll correct that in the description box below. But these are both the standards of Europe compared to Italy, France, Spain. In terms of population, the UK, these are small, tiny NATO countries, but they were there on the ground fighting. So obviously, if these tiny little countries are there fighting in Ukraine, then we can infer that many, many other NATO countries were there. But I wasn't shown that. So I was shown that me being shown those 2 small countries reflects the fact that a very, very large number of NATO member countries will have troops on the ground there, because obviously it wouldn't just be the Dutch and the frickin' Estonians there. They're minor players. But I haven't been shown some of the bigger players on the ground yet. Who knows? Maybe I'll get dreams about that in the future. It's the 4th point. I was being shown that this was a direct conflict with boots on the ground, not a proxy war anymore. It's effectively what it's been, because a lot of these Ukrainian troops are trained and armed by NATO soldiers and officers, and a lot of NATO troops from NATO armies have been training Ukrainian forces in Ukraine for a lot of the last 2 years. Hasn't been in the media that much, but yes, a lot of the NATO countries have had special forces. I think the US and the French for sure, and the British, probably many others we don't even know about, fighting on the ground, fighting the Russians. But it's just kind of whispers about it. But yeah, that's definitely happening. So it's a proxy war at the moment, and it's not really Ukraine versus Russia. It's Ukraine and all of NATO supplying and training and giving a lot of support, including a few troops on the ground. Indirectly, through the Foreign Legion units fighting Russia. It's not Russia versus Ukraine. It's kind of Russia versus the entire West on some level, and Ukraine. If it was just Russia versus Ukraine, it would have been over in a few months. But yeah, this dream was confirming for the first time, I was being shown that in the near future, NATO will put boots on the ground, and it will be direct war, not NATO troops giving, NATO member countries giving weapons to Ukrainians to, quote, fight to the last Ukrainian because we consider them expendable. If we're sociopaths like a lot of the deep state politicians in the US, like is it Victoria Nuland and all these demons, just demons. No, it won't be Ukrainians who are trained and armed by NATO countries, with a few NATO intel people in Ukraine and NATO troop instructors and a smattering of NATO countries, special forces fighting on the ground. No, it'll be entire NATO armies fighting out in the open, fighting Russia directly. It won't be a proxy war anymore. It will be out in the open. It will be direct conflict, head to head. No more nothing out in the shadows. Yeah. Okay, I think this is point number 5. I'll correct myself if I'm wrong in the description box below. But the 5th point is that, it was made clear to me that just by the scale of the combat I was seeing, that this was you could tell this was really important for the Allied side and for Russia. Well, I mean, obviously for Russia, they've already got huge forces and huge numbers of men and spending a ton of money, and a lot of people are dying on their side. Ukraine is obviously committing everything because they're fighting to protect their homeland, but in terms of what NATO was putting on the ground, you could tell that this was very high stakes because they were throwing everything at it. It was huge. It was a huge war. Just vast battles up and down this front line. Point number 6, again, this kind of goes back to the Deja vu point about the karmic loop of World War II. It was given to me that it will be similar to how it was in World War II. It was like an absolute meat grinder in there. So many people were dying on each side. It was just, millions died on the Eastern Front in World War II. It was given to me that, again, it'll be like that again in World War III on the Eastern Front, with Russia versus Germany. Germans probably will have troops on the ground. Had that other dream about Russia using tactical nukes on German troops. I'm pretty sure it was in Ukraine. I haven't had that explicitly confirmed, but Russia versus Germany and Ukraine, it'll probably be that again, but it'll be Russia versus, mainly the US and all of NATO. And just as it was a meat grinder in World War II, where tragically millions died in the tragedy of war, it'll just be the same thing again. Karmic loop in World War III. Point number 7. Okay, so if the Dutch were just about to arrive and well, that means that I think the other dream I had where I was shown Russia using tactical nukes on NATO troops in Ukraine, they were using them on German troops. Part of that dream was Dutch troops being slaughtered and wiped out by quite savage fighting with Russian soldiers. Well, the Russians can't fight ghosts, so like the Dutch troops have to be there in Ukraine for Russians to kill them. So I was being shown in this dream that the Dutch soldiers were arriving at a later stage in the war by the time the Russians had reached the River Dnieper. So presumably that fighting in the other dream where the Russians used the tactical nukes on German troops, I'm pretty sure that was in Ukraine, and they were slaughtering Dutch troops in Ukraine. Presumably that, obviously came after this point, and probably was happening in the west of Ukraine, but maybe it happened when the front line was on at that point, but it came after this. Yeah, because the Dutch hadn't arrived. This is the point where the Dutch had arrived, and so we can infer from this that based upon what I've been shown, if I am correct, who knows, I could be wrong. I believe this is prophetic, but we'll see if it fulfills. It's kind of like an ongoing open science experiment. I am open to being wrong. I'm pretty skeptical myself, and I do make mistakes, but I believe this will I guess this is what God was showing me, that so the Dutch troops were arriving at a point where Russia had taken kind of the eastern half of Ukraine, so presumably the slaughter of Dutch troops and direct conflict and combat against Russia will come at that point, or after it, when the fighting has moved west past the Dnieper into western Ukraine. Alright, so that about wraps it up. It's about everything I wanted to say and show. I should point out, I'm kind of keeping it a little bit opaque and vague, so this person, it's not clear who this person is. To his credit, to be fair, just thinking about it, I mentioned that son of German parents who's a Kiwi, who's now a lawyer / officer in the New Zealand Army. To be fair, to his credit, when I directly called him up on it and said I didn't deserve to be treated like that, you psychologically abused me and destroyed my freaking self-esteem for years. To his credit, he did say, "You're right, that wasn't cool. You're totally right, you didn't deserve that. You're a good guy. I'm sorry." So maybe he's not so emotionally stunted after all. Maybe it's just kind of the conditioning of the society. I don't know. But underneath there is a good heart. So he's definitely not all bad. I'd heard gossip from another friend of mine who I later had to ditch as well because he was toxic. They'd been still kind of talking shit about me, gossiping, but whatever. New Zealand's just toxic. But yeah, to be fair, he did apologise when I called him up on it directly. He would deserve to be punched in the face soundly. Not that that's something I would ever do or consider in this situation, but yeah, he would frickin' deserve it if he hadn't. But he did apologise actually when I called him up on directly, and I've done that for some of my ex-friends in New Zealand who were toxic, who I cut off, and they just denied it or didn't really get it. So yeah, it's not all bad. Anything else to say and add? Yeah, that's the first dream where I've been shown that clearly that NATO will have boots on the ground. The previous dream where I got shown German troops being hit with tactical nukes and Dutch troops being wiped out by the Russians. Sorry, in Ukraine. I knew it was Dutch. The Russians were wiping out Dutch troops. I was pretty sure it was in Ukraine. It wasn't 100%. But this dream was, saying, no, NATO troops will be put on the ground in Ukraine. So I'm assuming that that Dutch troops getting savagely wiped out by Russian troops was in Ukraine. And assuming, linking it into the other dream, the tactical nukes that Russia uses on the German troops, that will happen in Ukraine. And then remember in that dream I was told and shown that Russia will be the first to use nuclear weapons in World War III, and that it will happen. I think I said in Ukraine. I think did I? Don't know. I don't think I said Ukraine. I think I said in the East. But they were the first to use it in World War III, and it was So the details in that dream, I'll put a link to that in the description box below, about the presence and activity of NATO troops in Ukraine / the east of Europe in World War III was somewhat vague. This dream was the first explicit confirmation that, in terms of what I've been shown, and I believe will happen, that NATO will put boots on the ground and we will see direct conflict in World War III between NATO armies and Russia for the prize of Ukraine, for contesting Ukraine to retain, in the case of NATO and the country of Ukraine, that territory, or to, gain it in Russia's case. I mean, they used to have it under the USSR, they just want it back. Final point to end on, it is the largest country in Europe, excluding Russia, by land area. I think it's something like over 600,000 square kilometers. And fun fact for those of you who don't know about it, a little interesting geopolitical fact, Ukraine has some of the most fertile soils on Earth. There are these kind of rich, deep, very fertile soils in the east and central parts of the country that are apparently 2 meters deep. It's literally some of the most fertile soil and best farming country on the entire planet. The country produces a lot of the world's grain. I think it might be something like 10 or 20%. It's a lot. So control of Ukraine means control of a lot of the world's food supply. It means you've got all this extra food and your enemy doesn't. And then, they have other natural resources. But also, in terms of Russian history and Russian strategic military doctrine, there's a really good book called Prisoners of Geography. I think it's Tim Marshall or Tim Cook, the author. I think it's Tim Marshall. I'll put a link in the description box below to a page, probably on Goodreads, because Amazon's toxic. Try not to use Amazon. But I'll put a link to a web page which has a synopsis and talks about that book. I've read it. It's actually really good. I would recommend it if you're interested. It's basically just about how geography influences history and culture. And there's a chapter about Russia, and they talk about how historically Russia has been paranoid because to the west they don't really have much. Their geography from a defensive point of view is not favorable. There's just this vast, I think they call it the East European Plain, which runs from, frickin' Moscow all the way to, I think basically the Ardennes, to the east of France. France, by contrast, has excellent geography from a defensive point of view, because in the southwest of Spain you've got the Pyrenees, and you've got the Alps along with Italy, and then you've kind of got mountains in the northeast. It's sort of, France has really good geography. The US is probably the best geography in the world to become a powerful, rich, strong country. It's a separate topic. He covers it in the book if you're interested. But the point is, Russia has crappy geography from a military defensive point of view to the west. So their policy is generally they want to have a lot of territory far to the west, so as a kind of buffer zone for armies storming across the West European plain from the east, to kind of buy them time, and because otherwise the troops could be very close to Moscow and their cultural and national heartland. So that's one of the reasons. Another reason they want Ukraine. That's they're uncomfortable having enemy forces that close to them. They want some space, like a buffer zone between them and the NATO countries. So there's very good, valid reasons, and many beyond that the fighting will be so heavy, because there's a lot at stake in the battles for Ukraine and what I believe is World War III. So, just to finish up, to repeat this reference, please refer to the disclaimer in the description box below if you have not already done so. I believe these dreams are from God. I believe they're prophetic. I could be wrong. I don't think so. Just have to say that to cover myself. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope it's been of some value, and we'll see how things pan out. I hope I'm wrong. I hope it's not World War III. I hope none of this happens. I would hope for world peace, but my heart says otherwise, and my gut, and even just mentally, if like in my mind, if you look at the cycles of history, well, the Anglo-Saxon world, specifically the United States, goes through a major war every 80 years. Strauss and Howe, The Fourth Turning, I'll put a link to that book in the description box below. They've done analyzed the cycles of history, and yeah, American Civil War, 1860s, World War II, 1940s. They predicted decades ago that we were quite possibly going to be in World War III by the mid to late 20s, and look what's happening. So in terms of the cycles of history, it makes sense too. And you know, the Western world, especially the Anglo-Zionist empire most of all, in descending order of population from largest to smallest. Well, Israel's kind of a separate thing, so leave that aside for a moment. The United States, about around 335 million, I think. UK is about 67 million right now. Canada's about 37 million, I think. Australia's something like 27 million. Then New Zealand's about 5.3. I'll correct those figures in the description box if I'm wrong. I think Israel's something like 8.5, maybe close to 9. Yeah, like I said earlier in the video, a lot of people in our countries are very, very arrogant and ignorant and kind of overconfident because they haven't experienced what Europeans have, and the horrors of ground invasion, and not just in many cases one but 2 world wars. That's humbled them. So we've been running around since World War II with all this wealth and all these weapons, beating the crap out of, you know, goat herders in places like Afghanistan and Libya. In many cases, these are uneducated. Often, you know, a lot of these people in these parts of the world, in more remote areas, are freaking inbred, completely uneducated, extremely poor. They've just got freaking like Kalashnikovs and maybe some, you know, like some RPGs and a little support from other countries. But it's been pretty easy. It's not like it's been, you know, guys who have fought in Afghanistan and Iraq go to Ukraine, and they don't last, you know, a couple of weeks, and they come back with PTSD. You know, read an account of an American Marine. He said he went to Ukraine. Because they could barely move. They were being shelled for about 2 weeks non-stop. And I've read accounts from other Americans who went there from the trauma, who were just traumatized beyond belief by the horrors of war which they experienced. Because, you know, I'm not picking on the Anglo-Saxon countries and Israel, because the whole world does the imperialist game, but it's just the reality that we've been running around since World War II. Every conflict since World War II has either been a developing country versus a developing country, or a developed country beating up and bullying a small developing country which was kind of unable to defend itself. We haven't had great power conflicts and industrialized developed countries like Russia fighting other industrialized developed countries like those in NATO since World War II. So, you know, great power conflict is something very different. In World War I, there were accounts of just the shock of the English troops when they began to fight the Germans for the first time, because they'd just been used to, you know, fighting indigenous peoples, and these kind of relatively speaking poorly organized armies from civilizations that were much less advanced, with much lower levels of technology, and all. It's very different when you're facing a peer who's at your strength level or above. And just from a kind of spiritual 35,000 foot perspective, it's, yeah, God's given me that message in dreams and others too. Like, our countries have a lot of collective karma, so not necessarily in the Hindu sense. I mean, the Bible talks about that too. You know, as you sow, so shall you reap. It's just dynamics of energy. What you put out, you get back. So, I hope I'm wrong, but my mind, my heart, and my gut say no. So, well, I don't know what to say. It's sad, but it's such a beautiful planet, but so many horrible things happen on it. The good news is, wrap this up, you know, if you have this connection to God, either directly as in my case, or indirectly through receiving the warnings from people like me, and you are a good person, God will protect you, and you have the choice to not be involved. So, you know, some people will be called to fight in the war, different people will have different paths, different roles, but personally, I just want to stay out. I don't want to kill anyone. I don't want to be killed. I just, it's not my path. It wouldn't be much good. I'm more of an intellectual and a creative. If I was to be involved, I'd be best serving. Wouldn't be comfortable fighting for New Zealand at this point. I'd consider fighting for Spain, but I wouldn't be on the front line with a gun. I'd be much more used behind the lines doing other stuff. But I'm not planning to do that. I'm planning to stay out of it. I just want to stay out, and So, well, like I've said before, bad news is to believe this is coming. The good news is if you got the warnings, you can skip it. God always warns, and God will protect his people. Thank you. Thank you for your time.